My first time in this room, so I just want to check the sound level at the back. Can everyone at the back hear well? Thank you very much for waving. Well, good morning, and welcome to the launch of Resolution's Intergenerational Commission. My name is Clive Cowdery, and I'm here just to welcome you today and to introduce both David Willetts and the Commissioners who will be sharing more with you about how the Commission plans to do its work over the coming months. First, for those of you for whom the Resolution Group is perhaps not yet familiar, our purpose is to change outcomes for the broad majority of households in this country, very simply. We do this by producing the very best social and economic research and then engaging energetically with the public and political processes to deliver change. When we started this mission in 2005, we were motivated by a growing concern over the fact that the British economic model had stopped delivering shared growth for very many people in this country. That even back then, and I would point out that 2005 had very high headline growth levels of GDP, long before the crash, long before any recession, living standards even then were stuck for very many people. Our research as we formed as a group found 11 million people in this country living in 7.8 million homes, with 4 million children living in those homes with them, that were at or beneath average household income levels. Struggling, the group that we now think of as struggling to get by. And that was, as I say before, just before the crash. And so it had not to be the result of market movements, but the result of structural changes in the British economy that policymakers had failed to keep up with, that we'd failed to properly respond to. And we wanted to understand at Resolution both of those causes of relative stagnation. We wanted to understand the big drivers, technology, globalization, but we also wanted to know what the deliberate policy responses had been in terms of tax, redistribution, and the transition into and then out of working life. So that transition into getting your first break, getting through education, into your first role, how you work through your career, what your opportunity was to progress and add to your living standards through your working life. And then, as you moved out of the working age cohort and into older age, how that transition worked as well. Our first major commission was in 2011, and we focused on living standards. That enabled us to draw attention, by the time that commission had produced its report and delivered it to the country, to draw attention to a group that are now called the squeezed middle. And I would think that before we even look at the policy outcomes that flowed from that report and the work that's gone on since, the very fact that we've been able to change the hegemony or the ruling set of ideas of which politics works in this country to the degree that a newly arriving Conservative Prime Minister chose to make the centrepiece of her speech on the steps of Number 10 last week a focus on the needs of those that are, quote, just managing or just getting by, is a sign that after a decade we're beginning at Resolution to make some progress in changing the country's focus to the question of how our economic model can share the benefits of growth more widely. There were also specific recommendations, however, that came out of that report, not just a title like the squeezed middle. They were around in-work support and how growing household income can work by allowing second earners in the household to get to work, both in terms of childcare benefit, very practical thing, through to earnings offsets and disregards, allowing the tax credit system not to penalise you if you did add a second worker in the home, right through to older workers staying in work for longer and staying through to the point where national insurance could be offset perhaps as they chose to work long past normal retirement age. All about boosting household income. But there were two things we couldn't do and couldn't get at in that last commission. They were just too big. The first of those was that there were big limits on public policy in the future to help working people that were coming from our ageing population. And this would provide a degree of restraint on how policymakers chose to set their priorities in the future. And the second issue we found was that productivity and growth would continue to be the essential long-term source of how we raise living standards generally over several decades. We identified those two areas as areas that Resolution would have to attack later on. Well, later on has arrived today. We're now moving on to tackling these with the same evidence-based and inclusive approach that we hope characterises all of Resolution's work. And to deliver the first of these major new policy platforms, we deliberately targeted a long-term friend and ally of Resolution, and I relentlessly pursued David Willetts to join as executive chair after his long government and parliamentary career. David, as you know, was the first senior politician to call attention to the question of intergenerational fairness and the very tough questions of priorities that we needed to face into as a nation. In his book, The Pinch, in 2010, now in paperback, and I'm certain due for a reprint after today. What David identified in that book, it was that there were two equally valid but competing claims. There are no greater challenges faced by liberal democracies than how you negotiate or navigate two equally valid claims. But they do compete, and it's our job as a country to tackle the tough question of how to come to a fair settlement between those two equally valid and competing claims from two different age groups within the country. Now, tackling hard questions is just what Resolution's been created to do, and so I'm delighted to open today's Commission of Inquiry and to hand to David Willetts to introduce the Commission and its work to you. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Clive. And indeed, Clive did pursue me to join the Resolution Foundation so that we could pursue this theme, and I've never for a moment regretted it. It's great to be at Resolution and with such a bright and lively team that works together. Now, today is, for me personally, a very significant moment because this launch of the Intergenerational Commission really goes back to the publication of that book 6 years ago now. And it was perhaps just a bit niche when it came out, and perhaps even eccentric, arguing that alongside all those classic analyses of British society, divisions by gender or social class or ethnicity, we should think of our society divided between different age groups. But I think in the past 6 years, that kind of argument has become mainstream. And that's the backdrop to the launch of our Commission today. It's been a gradual process, I think, of acceptance that this is an issue that we need to think about. But just in the last few weeks, we've had two very significant developments that have pushed it even further up the agenda. The first, of course, is this, the EU referendum. Now, for us at Resolution, when we look at the EU referendum result and try to understand that 52% of our fellow citizens who voted for Brexit, it looks like there are two crucial groups. I call them the excluded and the insulated. By the excluded, I mean the classic kind of groups that we've long focused on at Resolution, people managing on low incomes. When you look at what's happened to people on low incomes over the last 10 or 15 years, you can really understand why there's some pretty angry people out there and people who easily blame globalization for their troubles. But that on itself wouldn't have got up to 52%. The other group were the older voters, insulated from many of the economic challenges. They owned their own house with the mortgage paid off. They got a defined benefit pension scheme and a pension lock. So for them, these arguments about what would happen to future growth rates or the future economy were pretty immaterial. Their economic position was as they would have seen it secure. And that, the challenge of the gap between older and younger generations in that voting behaviour brings out a crucial reason why this Commission is more topical than ever. And there is a second reason, which is Theresa's opening remarks as Prime Minister. And it's fantastic that she personally has put the issue of fairness between the generations right up there at the centre of the agenda for the new government. So we've had a referendum result which has reminded us of crucial divisions in our society, and we've got a new Prime Minister with this issue at the top of the agenda. And this is the point at which we set up our Commission, and we are so delighted to have a stellar group of experts who have joined us as the commissioners. You will hear from several of them in a moment. Torsten, my colleague at Resolution, Carolyn Fairbairn of the CBI. You will also hear from Francis O'Grady of the TUC and Ben Page of Ipsos Mori. There are other commissioners who are here with us, John Hills, for example, and we are so grateful to those people for committing themselves to this exercise. I should make it clear that, of course, it doesn't mean that the institutions that they represent or work for are automatically committed to everything we say. This is going to be a strategic exercise. We're not going to go around asking individuals to commit themselves to every sentence. And I should also say that alongside the commissioners, we have a technical panel of experts, and again, some of them are in this room, who are going to help us analyse the problem. At the first meeting of the Commission, we'll discuss our programme of work, but I'm sure we'll want to focus on those key themes: what's happening in the labour market, what's happening to pensions, what's happening to housing, how the pattern of the welfare state and welfare state spending is being distributed. And of course, we will be inviting evidence, and there are many people in this room who I hope you will feel willing and able to commit and send in evidence to us. There will be a lot of analysis. I've wrestled with the analysis for years. You're going to hear in a moment from Torsten about some of the preliminary analysis we've been doing at Resolution. But one of the reasons why we have such senior and distinguished commissioners is to remind us that as well as the detailed analysis, there's a very important big picture about our society and what holds a country together. And I've always loved this quote from Edmund Burke. And this quote reminds us that what holds a country together, the social contract as it's been called by political thinkers over the centuries, is above all a contract between the generations. And he puts it in perhaps rather more flowery prose than we're going to manage in our commission. But that is a fundamental truth which I believe is the impetus behind the work that the Commission is embarking on today. Thank you all indeed very much for coming along to the launch. And it now gives me great pleasure to invite Torsten Bell to take you through the analysis. Torsten.
I love the idea that David Willetts has gone from niche to mainstream over the course of 5 years. I'm not sure what comes after mainstream, David, but it's good to see. So, I thought we should start with two intuitions that lots of us probably share. The first intuition is that in general in life, over the years, the prospects for the next generation, on average, are better than the last. And the second intuition, which as most intuitions in life is in direct contradiction to that, is a feeling lots of a country has in its gut that something isn't quite right with that for the current generation coming through. And it's the energy and the dissonance between those two intuitions that's the core of our work today. So I thought we'd take you through some of our preliminary, I say very preliminary because we're about to spend 18 months doing the actual work on this, but preliminary evidence of what we think is going on across three broad areas, which is, as David said, the labour market, what's happening to assets, and what's happening in the tax and benefit system, which does a large chunk of the redistribution between the cohorts. And to do this, I should thank a lot of the team here, Laura Garden particularly, who's led the work, but has involved stitching together lots of data sets going back into what we call the depths of time, but other people call the 1930s, to look at what has happened not between specific years right now of different generations, but what was happening to those generations when they were 30, which for the 1930s lots is a long time ago. So here's the results of it. So first of all, this is looking at weekly earnings for different generations over the course of the last 70 years. And this is just to show you the intuition that things do in general get better between the generations was the case for some of the chunks of the 20th century I'm about to talk about. So the greatest generation, which would have been nice to be part of, I don't know if there's any greatest generations here, but I suspect not. So they're the ones that fought various wars, particularly the Second World War. They had quite low incomes, we were quite a poor country for most of that time. But the silent generation that came after them, i.e. not the boomers, why I get this rather boring name, the silent generation, did have a large increase in earnings on top of the greatest generation as well as the worst name. The baby boomers came along. Now the baby boomers' earnings boomed for a large chunk of the 20th century, and as you can see, they had lifetime earnings of around £740,000, and that uplift between these lines is reflecting the fact that we think, on average, that pay grows faster than inflation. That's what is meant to happen when economies grow, and that's what happened to the baby boomers. Then Generation X came along. They had a similar early pattern to what we've been saying we expect to happen. So the first intuition was true for Generation X. This is people born in the late 60s up to 1980. And they did see this growth in their earnings. And the drop you see off happening as Generation X becomes mid-30s, late 30s, is the recession impact bringing down their short-term earnings recently. But we forecast again, roughly, that the Generation X's, as they're non-colloquially known, they should have a lifetime earnings of around £835,000. That's a 21% rise on the baby boomers. So intuition one, despite the hit from the financial crisis we've just had, is more or less on track for our Generation X's. But then we turn to the Millennials. So these are people born after 1980. First thing, so obviously they haven't got very far yet due to being born late. But they're up to around 30, or some of them have crept over the line. They have had a large earnings hit over the financial crisis. In fact, we estimate they've earned £8,000 less than their predecessor Generation X between 20 and 30. So something is definitely going wrong. Then the question comes: is that just the impact of the financial crisis, or in which case, hopefully, we don't have another downturn now. Hopefully, it will start to unwind, or is something deeper going on? Now, those of you that are very keen on your generational stuff, there's a big report up on our website. But what it shows inside it is that looking at a sample of millennials who turned 25, entering the labour market properly, before the financial crisis hit, so before 2008, they were already not seeing any earnings growth compared to the Generation X's at the same stage of their life. So this is not just a financial crisis thing, something else is going on here. Then the question comes, what is going to happen to these millennials across the rest of their lives? Is this all going to be fine because their earnings will go off? Now, what's the truth is, we don't know what's going to happen to millennials across the next 20 years. But we've done two scenarios. An optimistic scenario that assumes the millennials' earning profile now picks up to show that same robust growth the baby boomers had. And if that was true, then they would have a lifetime earning of around £890,000. That would be a 7% rise on the millennials, on the Generation X's, who I said before had a 21% rise on the baby boomers. So even in an optimistic scenario, because of what's going on already with millennials' earnings, they will see only a third of the generational pay boost, or whatever you want to call it, compared to their predecessor generation. On a pessimistic scenario, which says there's something called Brexit going on, everybody's already decided that we have low productivity growth for the next few years, possibly permanently. Our forecast is to see the millennials actually seeing a 1% fall in their lifetime earnings over their lifetime compared to Generation X. Now, none of those are forecasts. Who's got a clue what's going to happen over the next 40 years? But the key point is we should be worrying about whether our first intuition is still true when it comes to earnings. Then we start to look at home ownership. Again, we start with the silent generation here. And over the course of the 20th century, there is a big boom in home ownership. So this is the baby boomers. Baby boomers had a 70% chance for owning their own home by the time they were 40. Generation X is the start of the tipping point, which has a significantly lower rate of home ownership than the baby boomers. So the tipping point happened earlier on home ownership than it happened on earnings. That is, as all the rocket scientists in the room will know, is because houses cost a lot more now than they did. But what's going on with the millennials? It is a lot lower. It is a lot lower. The baby boomers actually had a 50% higher chance of owning their own home by the time they were 30 than the millennials. This is not like some margin of error. This is a total change in what asset accumulation in Britain looks like. What does that mean in practice? It means that the millennials have spent on average £44,000 more on rent during their 20s than the baby boomers. And the average house deposit is less than that in Britain today. This is non-marginal stuff. These are real things. I should say, as well as housing, obviously the other big asset in people accumulate over their lifetimes is pensions. There's a lot of work for the Commission to do on pensions over the course of this thing, but just as a simple fact, average employee contributions to defined benefit schemes, so so to the old legacy schemes, is on average 16%. The average employer contribution to defined contribution schemes, the scheme that everybody going into work today has, is 3%. Now again, not with the rocket scientists don't need to do it, it looks like a lower, that's because the pensions are less generous. So on both fronts we've got an asset accumulation problem. Right, turning to the state. Now, the background to this is, obviously you all know the history of the last 5 years, which is that working age benefits have borne the brunt of austerity cuts as compared to a protection for pensioner households. Whatever you think about whether that's the right or the wrong thing to do, the simple fact is that working age benefits are on average 10% lower now than they were in 2010, and pensioner benefits are actually slightly higher than they were back in 2010. Secondly, the inflation boost that is about to come from the sterling depreciation that is going on right now is going to have quite a big effect on the benefit freeze that is in place over the next 4 years, because inflation is now expected to be 4% rather than 2%, but benefits are frozen in cash terms except for pensioner benefits, so you will expect to see a much deeper squeeze over the next 5 years on working age and child benefits. Lastly, this is the tax and benefit plans that the new Prime Minister and the new Chancellor have inherited from their predecessors. This is about future cuts to the personal allowance and future cuts to benefits, the ones I just mentioned. On the y-axis you've got whether people are losing money or gaining money, and on the bottom you've got over the age distribution. So old people are here, young people are here. And the basic point is that those tax and benefit plans they have inherited redistribute money from the young generation, principally through benefit cuts, and give, not loads actually, but do give some money towards older workers through income tax cuts. Now, the point for us, our point putting this up is not to make a kind of definitive view on whether those are the right or wrong things to do, but it's to say, David presented slides showing the intergenerational stress that's visible in the vote we had the other day, and is visible in lots of areas of our lives. The state at least needs to be aware of whether it's exacerbating or improving that tension when it makes tax and benefits decisions. And for those of us that have worked in the Treasury, no chart like this ever appears when a government is making a tax and benefit decision inside the Treasury. We think it might be a good idea to start doing that. So we're going to help them out on this occasion. So now, just to wrap up, so lots of people say, yes, this is really bad, being young is a bad thing. You're getting stuffed, you had a recession, it was bad. But there's nothing you can do about it. This is demographics and this is determinism. It turns out the economy is not very good. But we are starting from not just because David is a cheery guy, but because we are generally optimistic about the future. And there's at least 4 reasons for that. First of all, for all the talk about generational wars, human beings don't live in a generational war, they live in things called families. And we think they are reasonably likely to want to help each other get through it. Secondly, these issues are issues of joint concern. So this is support for house building over the last few years and how it's changed for different age cohorts. And the basic point is, across all ages, there has been a big boost in support for house building, even though not all ages would benefit equally from that growth. Reason for optimism 2. Third, policy optimism. Like on house building, there is something that can be done should we wish to do it. And lastly, reason for optimism, we have a very good panel who know a lot about this stuff and will almost certainly solve it for us. Right, and on that low bar to meet, we'll have the first of the committees going to come up, Carolyn Fairburn, Director General of the CBI. Thank you.
Torsten, thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here this morning. I have to say that I read The Pinch 6 years ago. Someone sent it to me, and you know you have a stack of books on your bedside table, at least I do, and it was one of the ones where I picked up one kind of Lyra evening, and I thought this was really something different. And I read it cover to cover, and it made a really deep impression on me as something that was a fresh perspective on some really fundamental issues. And so when David called me a few weeks ago and said would you be part of the commission, it's one of the easier yeses that I've had recently. And I have to say, it does feel to me more relevant than ever. For the chart that David put up in terms of the referendum result, I think was an extraordinary surprise to us all. It was a vote which, at the ballot box, seemed to be about ties between nations, and of course it was, but at the same time it exposed some very deep divisions within our society, and one of them was the gulf between generations. I had it in my own family with my 82-year-old father and my 17-year-old son not being able to be in the same room about the issue of the referendum. But I would say when I do talk to young people today, I think there are many, many reasons to feel very proud. They are flag bearers for values that really matter. They're a generation of creative thinkers and innovators. They're digital natives. I'm learning all the time from my children. And they are often more open and more tolerant than previous generations. But in the same breath, as we've seen from Torsten's excellent presentation, they're also facing a range of challenges. As today's Resolution Foundation report reveals, threaten to leave them poorer than their parents. And I have to say, it does feel to me that this post-referendum world that we find us in is a perfect chance to have a fresh start on some of these profound issues of our age, and to be bolder. And to be part of this, I'm absolutely delighted to be on the Commission with fantastic colleagues, and particularly perhaps to be speaking up on behalf of business and what it has to offer to this really important question. I think we know that business doesn't get everything right, but in terms of answering some of the biggest questions facing our society, including this one, I do think it can be the provider of solutions, and particularly in partnership with others who share our goals. And again, delighted to be sharing the platform with some people who share our goals today. So I thought I'd just touch on 3 gaps facing young people and put them in the context of where business today has a little bit to say, not answers, but something to say. So about a skills gap, the housing gap, and a really fundamental gap that's based on where you're born. So starting with the skills gap, the gap between the skills young people have and the ones that employers need. Today, more companies than ever are looking for higher skills. Back in 1994, 34% of jobs required higher skills. By 2014, it was 44%. By 2024, it will be almost half. And of course, with higher skills comes higher pay and higher living standards. It's an important part of the puzzle. The bar is rising, but the education system is not keeping up, and we still have a way to go on training. There, I think, there's a lot that policy and businesses can do together to make a real difference. You're seeing more businesses getting involved with schools, inspiring young people about what a career in business might look like, a career in engineering, in manufacturing, in creating things, and the value, crucially, of keeping STEM skills at GCSE and beyond, so that young people know what is waiting for them if they choose to stay the course. And we're seeing more and more examples of this. We are also seeing firms investing more in training and apprenticeships, building new routes to successful and well-paid careers, but more needs to be done. We know the GCSE A-level university graduate job route is best known, but it's not the best for everyone. There are great vocational routes to higher skills, and business has long called for these to be at the same status as academic routes, and recent government proposals are a very welcome step forward. And the apprenticeship levy, it's something that sometimes business is seen to be setting its face against, and I just want to say that's absolutely not true. I think it's an opportunity, if we can get it right, to make a real difference to the skills, the productivity, and ultimately the living standards of young people, as long as it's focused on quality and not just quantity. So the skills gap, a huge opportunity in terms of closing this intergenerational gap. But the second area I wanted to touch on was the housing gap, the gap between how much young people can save and how much they have to pay for housing. And as we have seen, more and more young people are living with their parents, they're saving well into their 30s before they can buy. We need more new homes. We've called for 240,000 new homes within a decade. House building, as we see, a real priority. This is the level of ambition we need. And we need to invest in a range of different housing types. And I have to say, again, I think there is room for really bold and disruptive thinking. I'm very intrigued by something that Legal & General has been doing in terms of putting £55 million into a factory near Leeds, which will create 3,000 prefabricated homes per year. Extraordinary. Nigel Wilson, I saw, is on the Commission, and I'm be super to have him there, because this is real disruption. It's going to be the largest house building factory in Europe, and the houses will cost just £85 a year to heat. This is real, bold transformation. Infrastructure investment more generally, we need a much more long-term approach. The UK stands 24th in the world in terms of the quality of its infrastructure, and frankly, I think we can all feel it when we try and move around the country. We've been facing decades of underinvestment, and it is affecting the next generation badly. The last government took very welcome steps with the creation of the National Infrastructure Commission and the commitment to a proper investment plan. we really look forward to working with government to do much more in this Parliament, and we need innovative ways of paying for it, because that is not going to be easy. And finally, I just wanted to touch on an issue where the CBI has been focusing a lot of energy, and that is the gap you face as a young person depending on where you're born, where you live. The gap between the opportunities available in London and elsewhere in the UK. It's very easy to sit here in SW1 and talk about opportunity, but it shouldn't be a lottery. Just to give you some headline facts here, taking productivity as the headline measure, and Clive mentioned this earlier on, the nominal gross value added per head for someone living in London is £40,000, so that's a good productivity measure. In second place is the South East, £25,000 per head. Yet many parts of the UK, productivity, GVA per head, is less than £20,000. That is the environment our young people today in some parts of the country are moving into. If we could just raise productivity to some of the least productive regions of the UK to near the national average, the impact on the opportunities and living standards for the next generation would be transformed. And I have to say, I'm very optimistic. I think it can be done. If you just take Germany post-unification, it had very high levels of inequality of both income and productivity between West and East. They focused on decentralisation and in spreading economic activity across the regions. And in productivity terms, the German states have now almost converged, with Eastern states' productivity growing by 45% from 2000 to 2015. That's the aspiration. It can be done. And working with McKinsey, the CBI, we are currently conducting what we believe is the most rigorous analysis of productivity differences across the UK, using ONS data, and we'll be presenting the results later this year. The levers are not rocket science. They're the ones we know. They're about local skills, about local infrastructure. Congestion in cities, we know, is a huge dampener on productivity. Inspiring leadership and ambition amongst companies to improve productivity and exports. But we think for the first time we'll be able to say to a particular region or a particular city or a particular LEP, this is what matters most for you. This is the priority ordering. And we think it will make a real difference. And we look forward to engaging with LEPs, with businesses, with local authorities, to anyone who wants to listen to us. Completely open source. And then on the back of that, we believe that devolution provides a real opportunity to make decisions closer to where the issues are, and that higher productivity means higher living standards and better opportunities for this next generation. So let's use the renewed energy of this post-referendum world to crack on with making a British economy that works better for everyone. We know the gap between generations is widening. We know that there are too many young people left behind. And it would be terrific if we could look out of this window in 10 or so years' time and say we've made a difference to these issues, and I believe we can. It's around modern skills, it's around affordable housing, thriving local areas, the issues that Torsten touched on, pensions and the welfare system. And we do need to step up and take action. And I believe that businesses working in partnership with government and many others are up for the challenge. So I'm delighted to be working with the Intergenerational Commission, the Resolution Foundation and fellow commissioners to try and make this happen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much. I'm Frances O'Grady. I'm from the TUC, and we really welcome the Commission too. And I'm very proud to be a member. Although I am conscious too of the average age of this Commission and the fact that I might be bumping it up a bit. I'm not going to do an Andrea Leadsom about being a mother, because I believe it worries all of us, that this generation of young people is growing up worse off than their parents. It's a problem for families, but it's also a sign of profound economic and political failure. And of course, as Carolyn has said, it feels all the more poignant as young people are on the front line of the fallout from a Brexit that very few of them voted for. But we believe it's important not to fall into the trap of talking about intergenerational divides or conflict. The root problems of growing economic inequality will not be solved by robbing grannies to pay the youth or putting baby boomers in the dock. We don't just need generational solidarity, we need a stronger social contract all round. And for the TUC, we see three key imperatives. First of all, and it's why this commission is so important. First of all, we've got to get everybody to wake up and recognise just how hard hit young people have been by a decade of economic turmoil and make tackling it a public policy priority. The crash, the recession, the long living standards crisis, young people have borne the brunt. They're more likely to be unemployed, more likely to be in poor quality or insecure work, and more likely to suffer low pay. Earnings for workers under 30 have been squeezed 3 times more than those for over 60s. And all of this has been, of course, exacerbated by the lack of social and council housing, the failure to build affordable homes, and to control private rents. Young people face a double whammy, worse pay, and then having to hand over a bigger slice of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. So secondly, we need a fair deal for young people as part of a wider agenda to address the profound inequalities and divisions we saw by nation, region and class expressed in that referendum. We need action to create good, well-paid jobs, and that means an active industrial strategy, more high-quality apprenticeships that lead to a decent career, and more investment in vocational education rather than cuts to FE colleges. And it means a proper living wage with no exclusions for the under 25s. By the way, I think that institutionalisation of unequal pay by age is proof, if ever it was needed, that tackling cheap labour and pay undercutting is about a lot more than immigration. We also need action to promote fairness in tax benefits and pensions, and as Resolution Foundation research shows, the government's reforms between now and 2020 will mean a huge redistribution from young to old. And that poses big policy questions, but let's be clear, equality of misery is not the answer. A third issue for us is how to galvanise non-state agencies and civic society to prioritise winning for young workers, including trade unions. Now, unionised young workers earn more, have more holidays, enjoy more training, and are more likely to have a pension. But just 1 in 12 workers under the age of 25 is in a union. Now, TUC analysis suggests that's not so much about age, but about the kinds of jobs and industries that young people are more likely to be concentrated in, and they are more likely to be low paid and casualised. Later this year, the TUC will launch a new campaign to help unions organise and win for young workers in an economy that is increasingly global, digital and casual. The world of work has changed, and so must we. We aim to innovate new models of trade unionism that can work for young workers. And I know that the likes of Mike Ashley at Sports Direct do not always welcome union organisers. But we believe that exposing 0 hours contracts, fake self-employment, effectively gang mastering in some cases, and giving a voice to Britain's most vulnerable workers should be recognised for what it is, and that is a great public service to this country. We also want to work with the CBI, with government, civic society, and all those good employers who do not want business reputation trashed by the bad. In this post-referendum world, surely nothing should be off limits. So I'll just end with this, that we believe Britain really is at a crossroads, and that at this critical moment there is no greater challenge than delivering fairness for young people. They've had a tough time in the past decade, and they do need hope for the future. But they also need a new national consensus on practical but ambitious policy proposals to make their lives better. And I very much hope that this is what this Commission will help deliver. Thank you.
get to discussion, I'm just going to talk about where the public might be on this issue. Is there a massive tension between the young and the old? I don't know if Anna Dixon is actually in the audience from the, she is at the back, waving at the back, Centre for Better Ageing. But does this mean that we need to massively redistribute resources from older people to the young? How do we deal with house building? So I just thought we'd look at some of that. I think the first thing to say about the issue that the Intergenerational Commission is addressing is one that it's not unique to this country. When we polled people in 20 countries recently, we found that really only in China and India does more than half the population actually think that the younger generation are going to have a better life than the current one. And indeed, in much of Europe, here's Britain, we're not quite as miserable as the French. I speak as somebody who's sold his business to a French company and is now called Ipsos Mori. But generally, Europe is pretty pessimistic about the future for young people. Now, of course, as Torsten's already very eloquently said, we can't predict the future, but we can certainly reflect what current concerns are. And what's happening is that, if anything, anxiety is growing. It's normal in opinion polling for people to say that they're optimistic about the young, that they expect the next generation to have a better life than them. But what's happened in Britain over the last 13 years is that back in 2003, before the crash, that was true, 43% of people were expecting today's youth to have a better quality of life than their parents. After the crash, that fell, and many more people, 3 times more, were expecting their lives to be worse. And then, this year, it's now the majority of people expecting young people to have a worse life than their parents. Now, this probably won't happen, we hope, but who knows? Certainly that pessimism is there. It's real. And a society that doesn't have much faith in a better life in the future is a difficult society, perhaps, or a tense society to live in. What are the issues? The interesting thing, of course, is perhaps that the young in particular are more negative about their future. So if you split it, and we've seen a lot of analysis by generation, and of course that's one of the things that Bobby Duffy, who's also lurking in the audience, and his team at the Social Research Institute, Ipsos Mori, have been looking at, inspired in part by David Willetts' book of a few years ago, is that how things split by generation is often the biggest dividing line in our society. You know, in opinion polling terms, we often used to think that class was everything that you needed to know, really, to understand British society. Today, we think, actually, very often, it's when you were born, and not actually where you are in society, necessarily. So, overall, then, 53% of people in this analysis saying that they expect things to get better, but of course, overall, for the young, it's 47, Generation X, 43, the baby boomers, only 21% of them expecting their life to be worse, and if you were lucky enough to be born before 1945, 81% of those people think that their life's better than their parents. So you can see that by generation, people are successively more pessimistic. With the young, even though 33% of them expecting life to be better, but 47% worse, and a very big difference with my generation. The baby boomers, 67% of us saying, yeah, our life's better than our parents. And most of this panel, except Torsten, maybe. What are the issues? Housing and work. We've asked people, okay, so why, in what ways are people's lives going to be harder than their parents' generation? And lots of stuff around money overall. This is the population as a whole, just thinking about the millennials, the under 35s. Difficult to buy your own home, less secure work, less well-paid work. We've got the whole spread of issues, less economic growth, student debts, but lots of anxiety about housing. When we cut it down, we look at the millennials themselves, what's actually worrying them. Interestingly, it's not quite so much the housing. 48% of them mentioning work-related issues, the 18 to 34s, and housing-related issues, actually it's the parents of these people who are more likely to be focusing on that, maybe because they're paying their rent in some cases, or indeed they've moved back home. Many of us in this room will have returning teenagers, including me potentially. So housing, less of an issue, but certainly, those issues very, very stark, and we need to unpick that. But I think a key point in all of this is that despite these stark differences by generation, what we haven't seen, when we've sat down in focus groups, up and down the breadth of this country, looking at people and talking to them in the whites of their eyes, rather than clicking on a poll or taking part in a survey, is that there is not any sort of intergenerational tension that's being voiced out there. These, as we've already heard today, are people's parents and grandparents. And actually what you see, of course, is immense sympathy amongst the young for pensioners. They know, they see them struggling, they see how difficult it is. And indeed the young, in terms of their attitudes, are very different in terms of policy solutions that they might expect than, say, my generation. So when we ask the young whose benefits should be protected, they say pensioners. Whose benefits should be cut? Precisely the people whose benefits have been cut, the working age benefits. The young are actually in some ways, most sceptical about benefits for the working age poor. And what we see all the time as we dig into the data going back right to the 1960s, 1980s, is very different generational sets. And I think as we try and arrive at solutions that are for society as a whole, our challenge will be understanding that different generations have very different perspectives. This is one of the biggest and most stark differences. Do you agree or disagree that the creation of the welfare state is one of Britain's proudest achievements? And if you were born before 1945, whenever you've been polled, you've always said yes. 7 out of 10 people have said that. If you're my generation, and people's views don't change, we're a bit less wedded to it. We weren't necessarily alive at the time of its foundation. Generation Y, many of you in this room, 1966 to 79, less keen still. Post-1980, less keen still. Now this does not mean that people born after 1980 don't like the NHS or don't believe in the idea of a safety net, but they don't have that same instinctive belief in big state solutions. It's perhaps one of the reasons why the sorts of changes to educational support that led to... I was demonstrating out there in the 1980s about my grant being taken away or being reduced. I know exactly. I got through my education. I think at the end I had a debt of £400 because Her Majesty's government had paid for absolutely everything. Now, lucky, poor old me, wasn't it terrible? These people aren't out there protesting. I was coming down here most months to some protest or other. These people are not protesting because they don't have that same expectation of a big state solution. So as we try and find out what sort of options might be available, understanding the fact that different generations have very different perspectives will also be important. And we're delighted to be part of this Intergenerational Commission. Thank you.
Very good. Well, you've heard brief presentations now from several of us on the Commission. This is your opportunity to put questions. If you could give your name and organisation, and if there's a particular expert up here you've got in mind, do say so. Who would like to set the ball rolling? Yes. I'm going to, actually, as I see several hands up, I'm going to collect 2 or 3 interventions, so we'll then move over to the side. Yeah.
William Claxton Smith, homeowner and defined benefit pension recipient.
Congratulations.
I was wondering whether you feel that actually housing is going to be the massive part of this issue, as I was actually skimming through the report. And while there are other areas that may actually matter, it seems to me that capital formation through the housing market probably is going to explain very large parts of the problem.
Right.
I wonder what the panel felt.
Bid for housing. Laura Downs, company. I should say I do so many of these intergenerational discussions. They begin like meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, where people have to confess which generation they belong to and when they were born. But you don't have to feel obliged to confess. Exactly, you don't feel. Yes, the young lady there, and then the guy behind. Yeah.
Elena Parrott, I'm a recovering politician from Wales. I just wanted to ask Ben particularly about the research about tensions between the generations. Clearly it's unacceptable to anyone to attack their own grandmother and to harbour those kinds of resentments. But I wonder if there's any evidence that sense of solidarity has changed at all since the Brexit vote, where there has been a change, I think, in the rhetoric in the press.
Right, do you want to pass the microphone along to the guy just to your right?
John Bright from Harrow, Bailey Booner. The obsession it seems to be that runs through several decades in this country is all about home ownership, and that's not always the case in Europe. With our continental cousins, home ownership is not the big issue until they're 40. Although we have this presumption that everybody wants to be a homeowner. I'm just hoping that the Commission will actually look at housing costs, the actual rent people are paying, all their mortgage costs, not just whether they can afford a house or not.
Right, okay, and then Finally, Laura, too, on the other side, the lady there. Yes, yep, and then we'll come to that.
Eliza Philby, King's College London, Millennial. Yeah, just. I wonder if, I got a sense of what the initial presentations are sort of getting at. Isn't it fundamental that we look not only at the problems for millennials and how they perceive them, not in terms or definitions given to them by baby boomers. You know, most millennials actually are perfectly happy to rent because they have actually a sense of fluidity in terms of their work, their geography, across borders. So actually home ownership, the concept of it, they may be socially conditioned, have been socially conditioned against it, they may not actually want it. Same with unions. You know, the concept, 19th century construction of a trade union may not be actually something that millennials really can see as working for them, in its current form. So in a sense, I just wonder if it's defining the problems and the solutions that actually address the people that it's supposed to meet.
Well, I think, just briefly comment on that final, we're very aware that we have to dig down into what actually people's attitudes are. There is this interesting theory of the kind of gig economy and there's a massive decline in car ownership in London when people will just use an Uber or rent a car for the weekend. So we're actually going to explore whether that applies. The evidence I've seen in terms of Benjamin is actually the aspiration for home ownership remains surprisingly widespread.
Unchanged, yeah, pretty much unchanged. But just in some ways what you're seeing is people reconciling their aspirations with what they think is actually going to happen. But the aspirations change much less than we might imagine.
And you had another question, Ben, I think.
I think that we haven't done a load of work post-Brexit, and I do think on this, and I speak as somebody who loves Twitter, we must be careful about Twitter obviously not letting people complaining that the old folk have stolen their future, because of course history is made by those who bother to turn up at the voting booth. The other thing to note, of course, is that Pokemon Go, which you will notice lots of people playing if you wander the streets, has received about 2 or 3 times as many tweets in the last 48 hours as all of the tweets about the EU referendum. So young people aren't necessarily obsessed about this issue, even though it is clearly one that we need to address.
Caroline, do you want to add?
I just pick up on the home ownership issue, because I think that is a really interesting question as to what today's young want out of that. I just make one observation from the work we've been doing on regional productivity, is that internal migration within the UK, forget immigration, but people moving around the UK is relatively low compared with quite a lot of other countries, and that we are looking into what effect this might have on productivity. Now, I don't want to draw any connections at the moment between that and home ownership, except to say that the more fluid your housing market and the easier it is to move, the bigger the impact it might actually be on our economy. It'd be quite good to look at the connections.
Francis.
I wanted to pick up on the point about what it is young people want, and clearly young people's lives have changed compared to previous generations. Even having babies later and fewer of them makes a big difference to the way you want to live your life. I would say in terms of unions, when you look at highly unionised areas, you get very good levels of union organisation amongst young people, so student nurses, student teachers, midwives, you name it, then there's hardly any difference, and that does seem to work for people. But I have a sense of, a union movement is a living thing. We draw our cultures from the culture of the people who join it, and they reinvent it. And currently, in my view, we're massively underinvesting in digital, we're underinvesting in new models that work for different sorts of working lives. But I'm conscious, it was great, for me it's good to see work issues being right up there, because I think we need to look very closely at that. Housing is massively important, but work and the experience of work for young people today is something that we've really got to get under the skin of. And just my final point is I really think it is important, certainly in terms of the work that we're doing in the trade union movement, that young people themselves are leading it and are at the heart of it. But I'm also conscious that people, in my book, can sometimes have distressingly low expectations of what life should offer. And very often, particularly when you're looking at very young workers going into the workplace, they're desperate just not to make a massive mess up themselves, rather than necessarily expecting that they should get decent pay and fair treatment. So again, for me, there's a dynamic there where it's also about raising people's expectations of what we should all be entitled to.
Any quick comments? Well, on housing, I think the first question, I think the key issue that needs to go beyond this who owns a home things is it's not just about the short term right now, it's annoying to be 35 and not own your own home. Like a Britain where the majority of people are renters for most of their lives is a different Britain, like in lots of different ways. I'll give you an example. The state subsidises pensioners that don't own their own home or live in social housing a lot through housing benefit. In a world where a huge swathe of the population is moved from being a pensioner with a home to a pensioner that rents, then we're all going to be paying tax to pay for that. There's not some kind of other way of dealing with this. And that applies, there's lots of different ways that that's relevant. Like, lots of people in the future will be drawing down the value of their house to provide their living standards in retirement. That's not going to be available to people if they haven't built up that asset over their lives.
Now, and this time we'll turn to the back half of the room, and I've seen several hands up there. Rob, I think I can't quite see the people, but I trust you to identify 3 or 4 questioners there. Yeah. Yes, far away. Give your name and organisation.
Rick Berry from Sperry at the University of Sheffield. Just a couple of comments. One, I think one of the first things that Torsten said about defined benefits being a legacy, like defined benefit pensions being a legacy system, it's not at all. I'm a millennial just about, and I have a defined benefit pension. I think it's, it's not historical inevitability defined benefit pensions are coming to an end and be replaced by defined contribution. So tackling that is just a kind of radical solution I'd like this Commission to think a little bit more about, not just about contribution rates, but about tax pensions. Also on housing, I think that too often we ally, there are many housing crises. There's a housing, and two main ones, housing affordability and housing availability, and too often they're allied. And Caroline's sort of enthusiasm for these prefab houses being factory made, I think, is a product of these crises being allied. There are, in some areas there are both problems, but in many areas there is only one of these crises. So I think we need to be a bit more clinical about the housing problems that we face before we develop. So that you should just building loads more cheap houses is not necessarily the answer, because they won't be in the right places.
Right. We've got a lot of other people who want to now, Rob, do you want to pass on to a couple of other people? Yeah.
Hi, Bryce Shaheen from CAST. Just a couple of things. I guess one, this difference between young and old, of course, we have to think about the intersection. So it's also about, it is still about class, and it is about also race. So of course, being rich and young is very different to being poor and young. I look forward to that detailed analysis. And I think the second thing is that it's weird to have this discussion and not meant to mention climate change at all. I mean, of course, that will set different parameters on the lives that people can lead in future years. And I wonder how much that will come up. And finally, just in terms of the policy as we look ahead, I mean, I know we're at the very start of this commission, but it's hard to imagine where else it can go apart from a big redistribution of wealth, and I just wonder how much that's already coming up in conversation.
Right, and then there's a third, yes, Brian, yep.
David Toppers from All Group. At the commencement of the Commission a consideration of the cost of housing in this country. I would suspect that there are many in the older generations that included that live in a nice large house, which is actually underoccupied in some of the definitions that are used. And hence, our children can come back and did give growth about 12 months a couple of years ago. So, looking at the actual occupation of housing, it may actually lead us to analysing the need for new housing in a slightly different way. And secondly, also to look at the way rights to occupation of housing in a rental context or a shared ownership context may actually provide many of the characteristics that people seek when they say they wish to become homeowners. It's that the right of occupation, right of personalisation, and not necessarily ownership, as the move and changes in car ownership have demonstrated.
Right, very good. And then Rob, is there a final person towards the back? I want to give the microphone to you.
Thank you. It's book from the Social Liberal Forum, just about millennial. I wonder to what extent the Commission's going to consider the role of gaps in political power as a driver of the sort of gaps in income and asset ownership and wealth that you've identified. You do a bit of thinking about it, and you kind of come to the conclusion that it's gaps in political power that give rise to the kind of stark policies that lead to the graph that Torsten put at the beginning of transferring stuff from young to old. Beyond Westminster, it's the gaps in power at the workplace that young people often feel disempowered to try and argue for better earnings and so on. I wonder to what extent would we look at those gaps in political voice as drivers of the intergenerational affairs going forward.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think a lot of those I will regard as suggestions and proposals for us as commissioners. I'm going to ask each of my fellow commissioners to make one point in response. I would just say to the lady who asked about climate change, we have taken a deliberate decision, as we can't do everything, we're not going to include climate change within our terms of reference. However, we will certainly learn from the work of Nick Stern and others about how you value the future and what kind of discount rate should be applied, particularly but not only within government. So we'll try to draw on some of the insights from that debate. But because it's got to be a management process, we can't do the whole climate change issue. Now let's start. So each one of the commissioners respond on one point. Torsten.
Well, on the question on, it's definitely right that we will need to look at intra-generational inequality, not just at intergenerational, which is I headline, not least to provide a bit of a contrast and things like that. And on the issue on defined benefit pensions, it is of course true, Craig, that if you work in the university or some parts of the public sector, you still do get a defined benefit scheme, and we'd love that to be more widespread, but there is also this thing called the real world where it's not.
Karen.
France.
Sorry. France is
I very much support that concern that this shouldn't just be about intergenerational inequality. We would be missing the key targets if we didn't recognise that inequality within generations can be greater than between. So, we have to tackle the root causes here.
Karen?
Just picking up on that last point actually about political power, and I'm not going to comment on political power, but I think the question of power and voice is a really interesting one for the new generation. So I think we do have a society which is quite patriarchal. And in general, if I talk about business, most businesses have not really had young people. You have to earn your right at the table by working at the firm for a certain amount of time. And I'm quite intrigued to see whether there can be new models of younger voices being heard. I know a few companies who have ExCo and they have YCO. They have a group of younger people whose voices have been. So I just think there might be some interesting questions about the influence of voices of young people in the debate.
Yeah. And I think all those points are well made. I mean, the point about housing and us having this obsession with home ownership, when the Germans are much happier with life, their economy and everything else, and much lower levels of home ownership than Britain, does suggest that it's not necessarily what we've always done that will get us out of this problem. The other thing I'd say about, obviously, intragenerational differences in wealth are important, but there are still massive attitudinal gaps between the young and the old, which are not changing, and they work in different ways. I showed you how people might feel about the welfare state, but in other ways, you will see massive differences in the next 10 to 20 years, for example, in the decline of misogyny, the decline of homophobia, just because these differences are massively generational. So we need to think about that as we think about solutions.
Very good. Now, I see we've got a lot. Yes, Laura, why don't you start? First of all, the lady on the left there. Yeah.
Hi, Penny Young, House of Commons librarian and self-confessed research nerd. And I noticed that this is a techie point, but one of your key messages in your little leaflet is about the data problem. Ben will know, of course, about the cancellation of life study. It's incredibly hard for academics as well to get admin data out of government, and therefore the ability to do the sorts of things you're talking about is a little bit harder. So my question is, what's your ask in relation to data?
Right. Yes. John sorry, but Rowan Flood, one of the nation's great housing experts. We must hear from John.
Well,
yes, what's the answer actually is the question.
I think we know John's answer.
I don't want to propose an answer, but I do suggest that the Commission look very carefully at fiscal policy. Fiscal rules are crazy. The departure of George Osborne opens an opportunity to rethink fiscal policy for the long run. We need to think about the balance sheets, the positive side of the balance sheet, and not just gross debt to GDP.
Right, very good point. And then let's head back. Yes, that's Lady there, that's right.
Hi there, I'm Eleanor Penny, Open Democracy Millennial with 40 grand worth of debt to prove it. Every 6 months or so there seems to be this move towards hand-waving about home building, but if you look around this city at least, there is a lot of building going on. It's just being built as a sort of global reserve currency for international finance capital. And so I was wondering what the panel thought about finding solutions to this intergenerational housing gap, not necessarily just in building, but in forming some kind of political will around changing the parameters for home affordability, tackling private rents, that sort of thing, with the houses that are in fact already there.
Right, and then behind the gentleman behind. Yeah.
Yes, I think Torsten kind of touched on my point before, but I still wanted to raise it anyway, just about social care and the future of social care in this country. As we know, people get older, a lot of homeowners, baby boomers will sell their home to pay for social care, and that system is already under an incredible amount of strain and will probably crack in the very, very, very near future. Obviously now we're going to have a whole generation of people who don't own homes, rightly or wrongly, and how is the government going to fill in the void for those people who desperately need to pay for their social care?
Right. And then, Laura, if you bring it forward to Clive himself, I think Clive, you wanted to make.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make your job easier in responding to some of those by excluding John's comments so I could briefly, but not saying that we weren't going to tackle the question of fiscal stimulus or any other paths forward for growth in this country. I said at the start of this that after delivering the Commission on Living Standards, the Foundation decided to focus on two large areas of further work that we wanted to attack. The first was this question of the restraints on policymakers in the country that our ageing population had, and that's David's commission today. And the second area of large work, which we haven't touched on or commented on today because this is the launch of the first of those, is the question of growth, productivity, and the role played in that by any change in fiscal approach taken by the country. That is something which we will be unveiling in the coming months, but isn't part of today's.
Thank you very much. Now again, I'm going to give the panel an opportunity to make one comment because there's been so many diverse issues raised. Carolyn, anything you particularly would like to say?
I would just like to pick up on this issue of social care. Actually nothing to do with my current role, but in a previous role. I think this is such a major issue. And it is being disguised, if you like, because of high home ownership amongst the older population. So I haven't got any answers to it. I'd like to think that there were some private sector solutions out there. Andrew Dilnott did, I think, a very good piece of work in terms of caps and the way this could be a public-private shared responsibility. But I think it is a major looming cost for the next generation if we don't look at it very carefully.
Ben?
Well, I speak as somebody who's just nursed two 70-something-year-olds to their death at home in the last 2 years, paying for it by selling things. So I absolutely hear you. I think that the challenge for the Commission is just how broad do we try and deal with all of the ills of society, of which there are many, or how do we boil it down? But absolutely. And this interplay between generations and caring for older people, which is going on and has been why the Pensioners' Party doesn't exist. To be honest, 20 years ago I was expecting the Pensioners' Party to be on the march by now, but somehow social capital inside society, lots of people like many of us in this room do social care, and perhaps in a way that we never imagined we would have to, but we are all doing it quietly. And there's more elasticity about that. In fact, London, although we can see the bank deposit boxes being built all over London at the moment, and there are 460 more buildings coming of over 20 stories if Brexit doesn't lead to a massive crash. Actually London has absorbed many more people than all of the forecasts by DCLG or ODPM or whatever it was called at the beginning of the century ever predicted, because of course we squashed them together. So this is Britain, we sort of muddle through, but we will try and look at as many of these things and how they interplay together as possible and as is sensible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting, this issue, because certainly what I hope we'll do as a Commission is be able to shape a kind of new contract between the generations where there is clearly something in it for people at all the different stages of life cycle. Imagine a future triple lock for pensioners where part of it is actually about access to social care. You might be able to get more moving parts, more flexibility, if people can see how for each generation we're trying to improve things. And on the nerdy question that addressed it to me, as actually having out of the Science Capital Budget funded the 2012 study, I'm very sad it's not going to happen. What we are doing actively at Resolution is working with government to try to get better access to administered data and easier systems for linking administered data. And it's possible that we will be making requests for those type of specific research projects as part of this Commission's work. Francis.
I really hope this Commission addresses the fact that people's lives, their access to housing, pensions, welfare is all predicated on the idea of a steady job with a steady income. And for many, many young people, that is just not the experience, and that's at the rough end in retail and care and catering, and it's in areas like creative industries as well, where it might be seen as a more glamorous job. But if you're freelance, if you don't know when you're going to get your next piece of work, how do you manage your life? How do you plan for a baby? How do you pay the rent, never mind a mortgage, or get the deposit down? And what is the framework of rights that we will need to ensure that this new army of self-employed, 0 hours, temporary agency, insecure workers who are much more likely to be young don't fall through the net? And I think that requires some quite radical thinking. Is it about trying to get back to what we had so that people do have that inbuilt stability, or is it about creating new frameworks for the way that our economy and people's rights at work run?
I mean, just briefly on this, I think we should be a bit careful about being too optimistic about our housing building abilities by wandering around the middle of London or even like the outskirts of London. I mean, it's true that in bits of London there are lots of building going on, but as you rightly point out, it's not clearly aimed at certain bits of the market. But there is a separate thing, which is, look, we know London is a special case on housing, and it is a disaster for people's housing affordability if they get house prices or they actually pay for their accommodation. But actually, over the last 20 years, across the north of England, it's actually caught up with large parts. Take London out of the picture, the north of England has in large parts caught up with the housing cost pressures that used to be part of just seen around southeast of England and others. So it's not just about we need to build loads of houses in London and the rest of the country hasn't got a housing problem. We've got a broader problem. It's not some southern obsession. Well, it is a southern obsession, obviously. It's a British obsession in lots of ways, but the whole country is suffering from rising housing costs over the last 20 years.
Okay. We're going to collect a final set of questions. Rob, why don't you start, and then she'll be at the back of the chance again. Yeah.
From the Department of Education. Just wondering if you're going to factor in whether and the cost of childcare in terms of whether and how that's an issue intergenerationally, the support or lack of support that the government and informal care can provide.
Right. Thank you, Rob. Do you want to? Rob's got one other, and then Laura, you can look after this group. Yep.
Hello, Alan Dixon, Centre for Aging Better. Very pleased to be part of the Commission. Lord Philkin will be joining as one of the commissioners. It was really good that as the course of the conversation's gone on, it's moved away from the sort of binary millennial versus boomer, which I think is potentially quite a misleading debate, and has moved on to recognise the need to look differently at each cohort, each generation. And your own work on the squeeze middle, and we've repeated some of that recently, identifying the group 50 plus, the squeeze middle aged, as being particularly at risk in terms of missing out on a good later life, which is our focus. We're very interested in the life course approach, but we're very much about people's ability to enjoy a good later life. And I really would encourage the Commission to be thinking through every generation the way that risk factors are going to accumulate and be very different in terms of what people's later life, whether that means working longer, not having the security of a pension, so how are they going to have financial security in later life as well as good health and other things. But really hopeful that the Commission will find solutions that are able to bring the generations together, and so that more of us now and in the future have a good later
That's
life.
a very important thing. It's great you're on our technical panel to help us do it, Hannah. Right, yes, Laura, the guy there and then the lady beyond. Yep.
Yeah, Stephen Buxall from Regeneration X. Can I actually call for an end of innovative funding and financing solutions? Because firstly, the two things are often confused. And secondly, I think we know enough by now to know that innovative funding and financing solutions are actually the most complicated and most expensive way of doing things.
There's a suitably subversive one. Then the lady beyond that gentleman. Yep.
Thank you very much, Simon Willett from URSA. It's good and not surprising that most of the commissioners highlighted skills and work-related issues. I know you've got a really packed 18 months ahead of you, which is going to be full of lots of issues, but just a bit of a plea ahead of the youth obligation coming in April. It would be great if the Commission has some reflections at least, if not recommendations ahead of that time, because it's going to be so important for young people and their support.
Good. Well, so I know that more people want to intervene, but we mustn't overrun. So this is the final opportunity for our commissioners here on the panel to make their concluding quick comments. Ben.
My quick comment is thank you for coming. And it's just the spread of interests and the spread of organisations here just shows the challenge that we have ahead, and we thank you for your help now and in the future.
Yeah, that's the right spirit. That's the right spirit. Carolyn.
Well, just to echo that, I mean, I think that there is such a diversity here, actually. I think a lot of the points that have been made from the floor also, it's going to be a prioritisation issue of some challenge, but terrific to be part of it.
Francis.
Very much agree, and I hope that we're coming up with practical solutions and ideas and debates, and that it isn't, important though it isn't just about government. I think all of us have to own this, and we all have a role to play.
Yeah. Torsten?
I just want to pick up on Anna's point, which is, Anna's point gets to the key of what would make this a success, which is getting away from the short-term bits of data that say this bad thing is happening to this cohort right now. What matters for the country in the long term is what do these short-term things mean across a life course for people who are then aging. So, for example, where are the sources of living standards growth for future pensioner cohorts who don't draw down on housing wealth and don't have the same kind of pension contributions? Getting to those kind of across a lifetime, what are the people earning and what are the assets they're building up is what will get us to the actual answers.
Good. Well, thank you all very much indeed for coming. I mean, we can sense just from the ideas and questions already how much there is on our plate. We're going to have to make it manageable, but it's good of you to come along. I'm obviously delighted that we've got such a strong and distinguished commission, and I'm grateful to Clive Cowdery for putting intergenerational fairness at the heart of the work we do at Resolution Foundation. Thank you all very much.